So, when you talk about surfaces in transport, it might at first seem an excessively niche subject. And, most people are unaware of the thought and research and development that goes into the surfaces that they come into contact with as they move through airports, train stations, take taxis and airplanes. But with the ongoing pandemic and fears around infection at top of mind for many, the role of surfaces in transport is now more in focus than ever. And the companies leading the progress in this field are working harder than ever to meet the demand for surfaces that are technologically advanced enough to remove pathogens while still offering comfort, top-notch aesthetics, things like that. Vision 20 is a series of discussions that examines the opportunities and challenges in surface materials as the demand for hygienic, functional, and beautiful solutions increases each day. This series welcomes insight from thought leaders, trend experts, scientists, journalists, creative minds, and of course, the team at Ultrafabrics. Today, we've brought together a dream team of experts to explore how surfaces in transportation environments are seeing rapid innovation and find out where they're headed from here. So I'm curious to start off with, development of advanced fabrics and surfaces, especially in transportation, was already happening before this pandemic. And I wondered, how much more activity, how much more interest, how much more development have you all seen since the pandemic began? And, basically in the last half year, have you noticed a change? Has it really picked up? So I thought maybe we could start with Maria, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, certainly. So number one, the way we're obviously working has completely changed, and the way we're using transport systems kind of changed overnight. So naturally, the work that we are doing in the aviation industry in particular changed overnight as well. Our clients suddenly were interested a lot more in antimicrobial surfaces, should I say. And because there is a difference, and I'm sure Matthew will probably go into that in terms of the difference between bacteria, fungi, and viruses. And the interest basically just increased overnight. So all of our clients wanted to understand what changes they could make in the current climate, but not only through surface design, but also through kind of physical design as well.
Nice. Matthew, maybe you have something you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, we've seen a huge demand, as Maria said, for antimicrobials. Like the second word off everybody's tongue is, do you have antimicrobial this, that, and the other? We filled in so many questionnaires and sort of spreadsheets about the details of our antimicrobial. And the really nice thing is that our products, especially in the aviation side, already had antimicrobial in it. So it's not like we've had to then run off and kind of come up with a kind of knee-jerk reaction. We've seen a lot of knee-jerk reaction products since this sort of pandemic started, but thankfully we already had the product already tried and tested, developed, the whole 9 yards, which was a really, really nice kind of really nice position to be in, to be honest, which is good. So
yeah, I'm curious to get all your takes on this. If you have anything different to add, maybe we could go to Benji next.
Certainly, yeah. Obviously, the development cycle is a long cycle, and we've been working on a lot of new technology even before the pandemic. But like Matthew said, our materials already had antimicrobial properties. But when you look at antiviral properties specifically, understanding, first of all, what test methods are applied and what type of virus strains, because the SARS-CoV-2 virus is certainly different than most of the other viruses out there. So just because you're effective against one virus or you're effective against a bacterial strain doesn't mean you're effective against the COVID-19 strain. So really trying to gather that information together and then work as an R&D team toward providing those resources to design teams and manufacturers.
Yeah, we also, and to sort of like comment on that about what Benji said, we've seen an awful lot of people that have kind of just flooded the market early on with, we've got antibacterial, and everyone's like, well, that's great, but this is a virus, not a bacteria. So, different ballparks. And whilst our antimicrobial does target bacteria, you know, we do believe it has strong efficacy for viral particles as well. So in the initial stage, it was really interesting because we came out of the gate and everyone was kind of in panic mode. And it was almost like the Wild Wild West. We had so many different companies come out with different cleaners and different products and these crazy products that were apparently going to cure and fix COVID. And then at the same time, which was really nice to see, we had like the EPA in the US that came out and was actually very, very strong out of the gate to say you can't make all these crazy false claims and things. You know, we have to be on point here, and they've done a really good job so far of keeping sort of, you know, everybody on their toes and everybody up to date with the registration process for antiviral claims and what have you. So that's been positive, certainly.
Yeah.
Maybe Purva, it would be interesting to hear from you about sort of, have you seen you know, real innovation in this space as well as that other side of things?
Absolutely. I think you kind of, that's where I was headed. I think what Matthew and Maria said, you know, this sort of period has really accelerated innovation. It's sort of a healthy mix of what I think what everyone is now calling COVID washing products, and then the real innovation. I think there's actually been a lot of great materials, you know, I think in the design, you know, kind of definitely the design industries, we're seeing a lot of great materials that are originating from innovation that was for science and technology, the healthcare sectors, and suddenly you're seeing the companies behind them immediately start to channel them for kind of large scale applications. I think there is a huge proportion of great innovation, whether we're seeing companies who are embedding you know, copper ions into fabrics, or, you know, I think there's products like HiQ out there, which are actively blocking the virus. And I think I think it's about a 50-50 right now. We're seeing great materials which are actively testing for the virus, and, you know, are embedding themselves into existing polymers or hard surfaces or fabrics, and lots of great products out there. And then there's a lot of them which are just tacking on to that train of antibacterials, coatings, which, you know, I think that, you know, they have an application and wonderful potential in themselves, but they are not, they're not targeted at this particular situation that we're dealing with. So I'd say it's about 50-50, lots of great innovation emerging and being accelerated because of this. And then a lot of interesting products out there which are sort of trying to COVID wash us right now. But lots of promise, I think. Certainly there's at least 3 products out there that I'm really excited to see being implemented in a large scale way, whether it's in aviation or, you know, rapid transit. It would be great to see them deployed in a big way.
Nice. And Laura, I wonder, you know, in what you do, what have you seen in terms of differences in this field? Maybe even on because you work on a kind of broader level with big projects, right? So curious what you found.
Well, so far, you know, we're generally implementing things with existing materials or starting to look toward new materials, either for, say, seeding products, and looking toward the manufacturers who are handling those sub aspects of the work. We have some projects that are under construction, and you know, our clients, we've been asking them, do you want us to make changes? And they're not really sure what changes to make. I mean, right now, the biggest thing in our side of the environment is really to create flexibility in space to handle people, and look toward the market to see what other changes are being made in the sort of, I'll say, the secondary aspects that we bring into the terminal buildings, such as things like seating, or, you know, potentially there'll be changes in the way, you know, things like rail cars or other mass transit have their materials. You know, they're all very focused on cleanliness now. So I think that, you know, it's the double-edged sword of knowing when you can bring in an actual new material and focusing on the current need for extreme hygiene, you know, different issues with that kind of aspect of handling the current condition while we're waiting to see what are the best new products out there. I'm
curious if you have seen, you know, as things are developing, even if we move a little bit beyond surfaces, materials for a moment, to radical new ideas in terms of transport design, or how we move people through spaces, or urban transport networks, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that the biggest change that we're going to see is a further advancement of the need for touchless environments. Although people all want to be with people right now, and we're all locked into this Zoom world, the reality is that the less people you have to interact with, the easier you can self-handle things without touching the equipment. Now cities like New York have made it so you can load something on your phone and actually use it to pay for your transit into the subway system, as an example. So you're only touching your own object. And it just makes it easier for people. So I think that moving toward a more and more touchless environment is one big thing. So, even further in engaging with IT and computer technology. It has the aspect of, sharing your information more, which may make some people nervous. So I think that's one change. And the other is just more this whole question of handling crowds and encouraging people to distribute themselves. So I think some of it's operational more than design right now, in the current time that we're dealing with things.
So Maria, I'd be curious to hear from you about, in an increasingly touchless world of transport, what role does, material and finish and, texture play in that new world?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question, because obviously my job is completely about the tactility of materials, how they perform, what they look like. So the Pure Skies concept that we actually did launch a few weeks ago basically took all of those ideas and kind of really wanted to experiment with what is the future of these surfaces. And actually, picking up on Laura's point, we did actually look at a touchless journey as well. So the actual digital journey the passenger would have through the airport and then kind of getting on board to the point of ordering dinner and wine through your own device, so that the contact is really limited on board. But the actual material experimentation that we did in terms of how these suites and seats need to change, we looked at the different types of porous and non-porous materials, kind of antimicrobial treatments that would need to be added. The differences between using a fabric and the perception of fabric to a passenger versus an ultra leather or a faux suede, because it's all about perception as well, not just the actual reality, because the virus is invisible, the actual treatments are invisible. So the big thing that actually came through is what is the perception of cleanliness, and colour is a massive kind of part of people's psychology. So we really wanted to kind of build on this story of reassurance, that when the cabin is being cleaned, and we looked at kind of many different kind of types of cleaning, from kind of the standard manual cleaning, fogging, UVC cleaning, and heat treatment, which are all ways of killing off the microbes and the virus. So the way we wanted to kind of reassure passengers were through technologies that would react to these cleaning methods. So we looked at photochromic and thermochromic inks that would react to the heat and the UVC light. And in this way, it would kind of reassure the passenger that once they are, or kind of the pre-boarding messaging of these interiors that are kind of showing up these patterns would basically signal the cleaning. And then once they have actually boarded, these kind of designs or the signaling has kind of faded away into a more relaxing environment. So you've had kind of all the kind of signaling of a clean environment, you're reassured, and then once you can kind of relax and enjoy the rest of your journey, because we all kind of want to get back to a normal reality, hopefully. I know a lot of people are calling it the kind of the new normal, but I think we're all hoping for it to kind of get back to a more normal.
Right. Because, I mean, especially if you talk about, once you're out of the airport, and especially on an airplane, in premium cabins, that sort of thing, one thing that's really important is comfort, aesthetic, the ability to feel good in the material you're sitting on. Of course, you're going to have a lot of contact with materials when you're on a plane or a train or even a taxi, right? So I wonder, Purva, maybe you have some thoughts about that. How do we make sure that we don't lose sight of that in all of this?
Yep, absolutely. And I think Maria really touched upon something that we've been talking a lot about right now, kind of the emotional side of some of these decisions that we're making. I think in addition to the aviation sector, we've been talking a lot about in hospitality, that materials that distinctly send out the message that they have gone through a recent cleaning are the materials that are going to be successful, or at least be appreciated by people, or draw people back to travel, back to transit and movement. Even though that is slightly counterintuitive to some of the data that we're actually seeing that hard, smooth surfaces allow the virus to grow more than porous surfaces, because the virus tends to get trapped inside the fibers and dried out. So, and yet that's so counterintuitive to how we react to these materials, I think as users or designers, because our perception is something like carpet is trapping the virus. And so actually we're seeing projects where clients are pulling out carpet and saying, if they're in the formative stages of something. So I think, we're seeing a huge shift. The other thing I would say is, in addition to choosing materials that have kind of a direct messaging to people that they've been cleaned, or I think that no one else has come in contact with them. And I'm going to give you guys the example of, there's doorknob technology with copper in them, and they've actually made it so that they're fingerprint proof, so that people can never see the imprints of someone else's fingers on them. And I think that kind of subtle signaling, as Maria said, is going to be what will help people in the future. At the same time, I think what we're seeing a big push towards is we want shielding from our spaces, from these future, I think whether it's, subway cars or airplanes, we want to create physical shielding, but we want to equally achieve transparency as well. So I think that subtle combination of protecting people physically, but making them still feel connected, is that kind of fine line that we have to achieve with resilient materials that are clean, tidy, cleanable, like hundreds of times they can go through cleaning cycles, but they also make you feel like you do have a connection with the passenger in another seat, or you are still traveling with people, you are still part of a social, fabric. So I think that fine line seems to be what products are trying to achieve, whether it's partitions or fabrics or even like doorknob materials. So yeah, I think that's something that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, one key thing that I've thought about is,
Yeah.
simple things like the handrail on an escalator. You want people to feel confident that they should hold on if they feel a need to hold on, or things of that nature. But, then you don't want them to feel like, oh my God, well, 1,000 other people touched it, and it's going to be the source of the problem for me, bringing the virus to myself. So, some of those kind of products are also going to be valuable in transit type experiences, I think.
I'm curious, is there, in terms of material choices, do we know, Purva, you touched on it a little bit, whether the material choices can actually affect the viral load in a given airplane cabin or airport terminal? I wonder, maybe Benji, you might have some thoughts on that.
Certainly, I appreciate that, Gabriel. Obviously, we would prefer non-porous surfaces, things that can be cleaned and also disinfected, which are two different things, certainly, because if you have, while a lot of these surfaces can be disinfected, if there is still dirt entrapped in those woven fabrics, if it's a nest for viral contamination, then you're not going to be able to disinfect those materials if you've not properly cleaned them. And most woven materials cannot be properly cleaned while they're kind of in use. It needs to be removed and washed or some other process, where non-porous surfaces, you can clean the surface and then you can disinfect the surfaces. So those are one of the advantages that we see to non-porous surfaces and materials such as ultra leather. The other part of that is perception that we mentioned earlier by the passengers. And so typically we would see very dark blues and navies and grays being used. And if you look at the healthcare industry, they've tended to go toward more neutrals, simply because you get the perception that you can actually see when a surface is being cleaned. And I think that may be one trend that we'll see going forward as well.
Matthew, do you have anything to add to that? What Tapas is saying about that?
I think, kind of touching on what Benji said, we've done a great job on the aircraft interiors industry over the last sort of 20 years or so of hiding the dirt. When you think about most aircraft interiors are either dark blue or dark gray, and they're deliberately done to show that there's not as much contrast with ink, for example, and general dirt and soiling. And then you think about, well, why did we do that? Well, we did that because we wanted to have faster aircraft turn times, right? And we were chasing the almighty dollar, of course, because faster turn times means a more profitable route and service. But yeah, like Benji said, when you look at the healthcare industry, if you look at PPE, for example, most PPE is white or certainly a light color. And the reason for that is you need the contrast to be able to show you when it's time to clean something. Same reason why you use stainless steel in the kitchen in high-end restaurants and what have you. It's a visual indicator to tell you to clean it, because it doesn't stay clean very long if you don't. So I've had the experience of seeing an aircraft interior that was made in a light beige color on a commercial airline probably about 10 years ago, and it looked pretty horrific within a very, very short space of time. And that was because people didn't clean it. And the one thing that you've got to remember here is that whilst we've got all these different disinfection methods with UVC and fogging and all those kind of things, they are not magic silver bullets. They do not magically cure things. You still have to physically clean the aircraft. And I think that's one thing that we found from a lot of the outreach that we're doing that people are forgetting to a degree. So let's say that you've got this wonderful new UVC machine that glides through the aircraft and disinfects everything. If little Johnny left half a cookie and he happens to have COVID and he's been eating it and he leaves it on the seat, doesn't matter how many times that UVC machine passes over it, that cookie will still have microorganisms within it that will still be able to proliferate over time if you don't physically remove it. So removal of FOD, foreign object and debris, is absolutely crucial. We've got to get good vacuuming on there, good cleaning, and those things have to happen first before we can sanitize and disinfect. And that kind of 3-step process is really, really crucial. And we've missed it to a degree, I think, in the very, very early stages of the pandemic. Everybody just rushed out there and went, let's just buy as much disinfectant as possible and let's maybe just soak the airplane in it as much as we can. But we have to go back to the basic fundamentals of how do you actually clean something. Remove the FOD first, then clean it, then sanitize it. And it has to be in those 3 steps. Otherwise, you're kind of sort of undoing a lot of the good work that you've already done, in all honesty. So yeah, important to follow those steps for sure.
Yeah, that's very interesting when you look at aviation in particular, because of course the quick turnaround of an aircraft is vital to profitability, right? So that's one of the reasons we traditionally think of an airplane as quite an unclean place, because they weren't doing all that much. Is there, find that there's pushback on that front? Well, how can we possibly do all this and keep it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it's interesting to see the different kind of ways that we've talked to most of the major airlines that we work with, and you see some examples of airlines that are maybe not spending as much time. I know there's been some reports of some low-cost carriers in Europe that are basically turning their aircraft just as fast as they were before. So it really does make you think, how can they really clean it in that period of time? Because you've got 189, maybe 200 seats. And if you divide 10 or 15 minutes by that time slot, you really haven't spent much time on each seat. Whereas you take something like United Airlines, for example, we've been very actively involved with them. they've actually done a really, really good job of dealing with cleanliness and disinfection. We worked really closely with them to kind of understand what they were doing with our products because they were on board. And I think they've actually been really, really positive. They've not perhaps had as much positive press as everybody else, but they really should do, because the job they're doing with Clorox, for example, as one of their sort of consultancy partners, and the Cleveland Clinic has been absolutely excellent. Been extremely impressed by what they've done. They've kind of been a little bit more the unsung heroes in this. So if I was going to give a hats off to someone, I think probably United would get my nod for sure.
Do you think there's room for more sort of marketing and PR to be done around the materials themselves? Because you see that, yeah, United has teamed up with this company, disinfectant company, and Delta has their own, and they talk about the cleaning processes, but they don't talk so much about the actual materials they're using and how those benefit passengers.
Yeah, I think there should be. We're having some discussions with them right now because, of course, I mean, a year ago, the first thing on top of people's list when they were buying material wasn't necessarily antimicrobial. It just wasn't. Now it is. So we've got a lot of customers that have antimicrobial products out there. They already have it. United being one of them, Spirit is another, for example. So they already have this kind of like added upgrade, and we're talking to them about how they can perhaps vocalize that a little bit more, because they have got that extra degree of protection within them. They've got that extra degree of kind of viral load, sort of decreasing area. So when you're coughing or sneezing or spreading virus, there is going to be a lower likelihood of contact transfer when you're touching an antimicrobial surface than when you're not touching an antimicrobial surface. That's for sure. How much and to what degree is yet to be 100% proven. We have some good ideas, but we're not 100% sure yet. But it certainly does help, and I think a lot of what we found, especially in aerospace, is that we need to put a reassuring message out there to the passengers, to the guests, that aircraft travel is actually intrinsically safe. We have these great designers at Boeing and Airbus that have done an amazing job with the airflow system. The airflow is recirculated every 3 minutes. You get completely clean air on an Airbus or a Boeing aircraft through the use of their HEPA filters. So if we can do a multifaceted approach, using that airflow, using surface technology, using material technology, using a good cleaning regime and disinfection program, overall, I think we can say, what is the risk of flying? It's actually pretty safe, and the risk of transference of COVID is actually pretty low. Low enough that I would recommend it to my own family if they were coming to visit me, for example. So I think we need to do a good job of marketing that and telling that story, because it's a really important message. Because the passengers, the general public, they're looking for reassurance. Everybody's looking, they're thirsty for knowledge. Is it safe? Is it safe? Is it safe? And the overwhelming answer, I think, really is yes, it is safe. And there's a lot of really good airlines out there that are doing a great job of putting that message out and telling and advising passengers about what they're doing to make it safe. We're all in this together, and it's very nice to see that suppliers, designers, seat OEMs, airframers, all airlines, we're all collaborating very, very well to have this kind of unified message to encourage passengers back to flight, and it's working. You look at the TSA passenger numbers, and they are steadily growing. So I think we're doing the right thing. I hope.
It's interesting that you mentioned the airflow. I think if nothing else, the pandemic has finally dispelled that myth that the public held, that air on board an airplane is the same stale air for 8 or 9 hours and never gets changed. Now everybody has heard about HEPA filters and airflow and 3-minute recycling, that kind of thing.
Yep.
I thought I might just switch over to a question about sustainability, because before all of this happened, I think sustainability was really at the top of the list for a lot of transportation companies, and now that's kind of taken a backseat to hygiene, cleanliness. And I wondered what you all have found in terms of that. Maybe Maria, I don't know if you found that sort of clients have sort of put the sustainability in the backseat for now, or if it's still a concern.
No, so we've found the complete opposite. I think basically being sort of planet-centric and sort of hygiene-centric has kind of come as one package now. kind of trying and making sure that we don't give up on sustainability because of COVID and the pandemic. So, for example, we had suggestions about kind of applying single kind of use sheets of plastic on meal trays, for example, in economy class. And each time a passenger would use that surface, they would peel off a surface to make sure that, you know, all the kind of the reassurance that it has been cleaned. But we've kind of tried to stay away from those sort of solutions and make sure that the work that we're doing doesn't give up on sustainability. I think it's more than ever, it's actually really important to make sure that because of the pandemic, we're not damaging the planet more, you know, in terms of the amount of single-use plastics that were used before the pandemic and now the increase. You know, just in our daily lives of people going back to pubs and meeting up in parks, it's kind of skyrocketed. And I think we all are more aware and kind of need to make sure that we're doing steps to reducing that kind of plastic waste that we're using. So yeah, I think they kind of have to go in hand in hand.
Purva, have you found similar things?
Definitely. I think our clients are expressing kind of a renewed sort of commitment to sustainability. And I'd say sustainability via like the root of wellness as well. I think understanding even more that what is sustainable also has to be less toxic, also has to engage with consumers positively, bring them comfort, bring them a sense of feeling that they're in a safe, clean environment, but also something that's helping bringing them calm and lower these levels of anxiety. So it's actually kind of a bit of a double-pronged kind of interest that we're seeing. It's very much tied to this idea of wellness and sustainability. I will say though that while we're seeing just this huge interest from some of the bigger brands, you know, kind of with renewed commitment, maybe slightly reduced funds, but you know, I think we're equal to that. We're also seeing kind of this widespread use of disposable products, which is so hard to avoid, right? We're all kind of part of that, whether it's the masks or the gloves or you know, even disposable cutlery, or the fact that everything is kind of coming packaged in you know, extra layers right now, and we're all ordering Amazon a lot more. So I think it's this kind of strange dichotomy that we're feeling, where bigger, you know, I think bigger brands are very, very committed, but the kind of at the consumer level, there's a lot happening that's increasing our throwing away of plastic and use of plastic in a really large capacity. But definitely lots of interest in wellness and sustainability, and perhaps more than before. Yeah.
And Gabriel, on that point, right, and really good point there, Pivot. We saw a lot of early projects out of the gate, things like seat blockers, for example, that block off the middle seat. And if you look at that from a sustainability perspective, then they're not really all that sustainable, because, and this is the feedback we're getting from our airline customers too, because it addresses the near short-term model for the airlines. So you block the seat and you spend, you know, probably say a couple $1 million on these seat blockers, and they last for maybe a year and a half, because we are going to get on top of this disease at some point. We are going to have a vaccine. We are going to have a cure. And when that happens, all of our airlines have already told us that they need to revert back to a commercially sustainable model, which is all 3 seats being used. So that means the seat blockers are then thrown out, and they now have no return on investment, which is absolutely not sustainable at all. Whereas if you look at more of a material-led solution and a multifaceted approach, all of a sudden, if you're able to, you know, to buy a product that has antimicrobial in it, that has long life and wearability and all those kind of things, then it lasts a lot longer period of time. It's a much better return on investment. Maybe we can last 5 to 10 years. And therefore it's a much more long-term sustainable project. You know, you've changed something, you've dealt with the coronavirus, and you've created a long-term sustainable product inside your aircraft interior. So I think we do tackle sustainability, albeit on maybe a slightly different level.
I think just to add to that point as well, Matthew, because I think the developments in plant-based fibres as well within these fabrics are, you know, kind of starting to roll out a lot faster. So this combination of sustainable yarns, fabrics, then the antimicrobial treatments that ideally are inbuilt in the manufacturing process of the materials just adds to the durability and the sustainability of the material.
With larger materials and perhaps with some of the materials you are all developing, one of the other issues is to be as sustainable as possible in the manufacturing. So it is possible that we're using certain plastics more or other kinds of things, but I think if the industry could focus on the plastics that are more easily recyclable, and on use of more paper and other things, for shipping, and encouraging ways for people to use those products, but also think more about the embodied carbon and the production of these products. In some cases, we may have to use more materials right now in order to deal with the immediate, but if we think about the bigger issues, just as a completely different kind of example, the construction industry is looking more at the potential use of wood, not only because it's sustainable to grow more wood than it is to bring more iron out of the ground to create steel or the creation of concrete, but because the material itself is produced in a way that really has less embodied carbon. So I think maybe with many of these materials over time, it's also a consideration in the manufacturing process that could be sort of balance out the fact that we're using more product in total.
No, just kind of going off kind of other industries as well and other different types of materials. Because one of the kind of interesting area that we found is looking at slightly more kind of edible materials. So for example, the on-board design, get on board meal tray that we did for economy class. We looked at bioplastics, but we also looked at compostable and biodegradable materials, including edible materials. So, why can't part of your food packaging essentially be compostable? I guess post-pandemic, edible was fine, and now it should also be. But again, it's the perception of what that packaging material is. But algae is an amazing material, and we've seen a lot of kind of algae-based packaging being developed. So making sure that this pandemic is kind of making sure that all these developments are being pushed through on the sort of sustainability side.
I think what's actually happening is as industries start to look for more durable materials, so things that can hold up to disinfectants not only once or twice a week, but maybe in some cases 10 times a day, where a material is being disinfected, and not only with disinfectant chemicals like alcohol or quaternary ammonia or bleach, but UVC light, things that you would never even think about prior to this pandemic as a potential cleaning agent or a disinfecting agent. As manufacturers start to look for these sources of more durable materials, by and part, we're going to find that these materials will last longer, and hence will add to the sustainability story of what's being used in the aircraft.
Sorry, just like one final point, and maybe just what Benji just said and Matthew said as well. I think we're seeing there's a clear distinction, I think, with some of these new materials that are responding particularly to the COVID situation. We're seeing wonderful materials that are responding to the virus actively. They have a great percentage and a short time frame in which they can attack the virus, but they're only good for 30 washes, or they're only good for like a certain number of hours. And I think making that distinction to consumers, to companies who are going to be using them in a large way, to airlines, that needs to be really clear, because maybe we need to go with something that's a bit more low strength, but it is able to last more long term, because then they're making a choice for that 5-10 year trajectory, rather than something that's going to be wonderful for, wonderful for now, but it's going to be absolutely useless in the long term, or it's going to wear itself out. So I think a little bit more education on that front is so essential, because there's a lot of high strength, quick fix solutions, even when they're not just surface coatings, and even when they're embedded, whether it's silver ions or copper ions. But we're seeing there is a clear distinction. There's the long-term products, and then there's the short-haul kind of products. So I think making that distinction is super clear it needs to happen.
Yeah. Actually, Purva, I'm curious if there's any specific project that you've worked on in recent months that you could highlight as something that was kind of an exciting innovation, or something that you really enjoyed thinking about.
Good question. Well, I have to say, what we're working on a hospitality project right now. It's not in the aviation sector as much as I think that would be an amazing realm. But that has been quite eye-opening to us. It's a large hotel project in Washington, D.C., and we're seeing a radical shift in the surfaces that they're wanting to use there, or the environment that they're wanting to create, even the emotional aspect, that comforting nature, but also very, very clear signaling. I would say that's definitely a good example, because it's not been built yet. So there is significant time to radically change their choices. So I do think, and of course, the hospitality sector stands to lose a lot from the current virus situation. So they're responding very actively to that. Sadly nothing yet in the aviation and transportation sectors that we've had a chance to work on, but I will say huge changes coming even for hospitality further down the line.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, have you seen anything particularly exciting, innovative coming down the line, or that you've been working on lately, that kind of thing?
Well, we're obviously we're doing with Benji some testing right now of new products to look at the effectivity of the current antimicrobial. At the moment the lab time is pretty scarce. Everybody initially was just working on lab time for testing of actual COVID transmission and what have you. So it's been difficult to get to. We're getting a lot closer to that, and hopefully we should have some more positive news coming soon, for sure. I think overall the nice thing that we've seen is that in the aircraft interior, it is generally a pretty safe space already. We're always keen to work on new technologies and to look at things, but again, we're not out there to make a quick fix and sell a bit of snake oil that can miraculously cure COVID and cancer while it's at the same time. We want to make sure that we've got a genuine fix. And I think what's really sort of come across in the last sort of few months is that we do have long-term product solutions, and I think it's really kind of galvanizing that thought process in people, that if you pick the right product and incorporate it into your interior in the right way, we can design our way out of this mess with some sensible design-led engineering. And I think that was one of the frustrations early on in this pandemic, is that some of the best engineering and creative minds that we had in the US that were potentially part of solving the problem were all busy locked away at home, in lockdowns and stuff, when we should have been kind of talking to them early and getting them out there and going, right, what can we do? How can we change this and that and something else? And that's happening now with all this great collaboration. So I think probably the most exciting thing that we've seen throughout this is just the really awesome levels of collaboration from other companies as well, that you traditionally would have been seen as competitors and what have you. Everybody is absolutely working in this for the greater good. It's going to take a village to solve this problem, and the village is working nicely, I think, so far. So very positive to see.
Gabriel, if you let me, I'll add a really super small point. I realized less from an implementation perspective, but more from a material development angle. We work a lot with startups and kind of play a role in their R&D side. And I'd say in the last few months, the number of companies who've kind of pivoted their manufacturing lineup to more filtering materials has grown hugely. And there's two companies. One of them is a company called FilterTex and another called WearPure. They're just accelerating in this crazy way to turning almost all their materials to have some kind of nanotechnology element that will purify the air. So whether they go into masks or hospital upholstery materials, or even bed linen we're seeing, or I think eventually in the aviation sector, once they've met kind of the testing requirements there, we're just seeing a huge push towards filtering materials. And I think that's the other kind of aspect. Aside with antimicrobials, filtering materials are seeing a huge interest, and a lot of companies that were developing, say, even I don't know, alternate leathers, have pivoted a little bit to including that filtering technology, and that's a huge push we've seen with the startups that we're working with.
I wonder if you were to sort of think about the future without budget considerations, are there any kind of big and bold ideas that you've been rolling around in your head during this time with all this time to think? I don't know if anyone in particular has one that pops into mind, but feel free to weigh in, anyone.
Well, one thing that we need to be sort of conscious of, and I don't have the answer yet, but we're for sure working on it, is that when you look at the COVID pandemic, aerospace has a really big part to play. If you think about that, this started in Wuhan. How did it get from Wuhan to America or Italy or Spain or anywhere else? It didn't come on a boat, right? It came on an aircraft. So, I think what I have seen is we've all kind of looked internally in the airline aerospace industry to go, it came on an aircraft. That didn't mean that we caused it, but it did come on an aircraft. What else can we do? Because we've got this like finite space. What can we do to stop that from happening again in the future? Are there things that we can do within the interior of the aircraft? Are there things that we can do with the material surfaces to not only mitigate the risk of transmission, but actually to stop it in its tracks? There's some pretty kind of out there thinking in terms of things that are happening. So, can't tell you anything that I know is for sure going to happen, but it's really stimulated a lot of thought to say, can we play a bigger role? We're already so intrinsically involved because we're the ones that connect A to B and B to C. How can we stop it in that? Can we be the genuine first line of defense? And I think there's more that we can do, and there's a lot of really good initiatives that are happening to explore that in much greater detail. But it's going to take time, right? So it just needs deeper thought. But that is positive, definitely.
I think just to add to that as well, the transport sector can definitely learn from other sectors as well. Because, for example, one of the things that we were looking at were kind of heat weld seams that have been around, in the fashion kind of weatherproofing industry for many, many years. So kind of taking all this knowledge that we can from each other and kind of really experiment and push the boundaries, because with the thermochromic and photochromic inks that we were experimenting with as well, at the moment it's just a concept, but why could these, kind of technologies not work within the transport sector? I think just picking back on your comment, Gabriel, I think, it would just be absolutely amazing to have this miracle material that would be, kind of have a great circular economy, that would be kind of commercially or home compostable, would, save the planet from the virus, and actually be sustainable and hygienic. So if anyone's got any great ideas to solve that, then I'm all ears.
Well, I thought, right?
Yeah. I think, as a material designer, that's obviously would be a dream material to come across, kind of that miracle solution.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be more of a combination of materials that don't transmit things and other ways that we mitigate the transmission. And, I think some of the things that we could learn from, not only filtration, but ways in which we move air, ways in which we control air, that we could learn from hospital environments or operating room environments. It may mean that we have to retrofit, whether it's planes, trains, heavy rail or subways, to change some of the way that the environment is handled, so that then the materials on their own can be more effective at mitigating the transmission of the disease, of whether it's this virus or the next one that comes. As Matthew said, we need time. But yeah, I think it's going to need to be a combination of all those things, plus encouraging people's behavior to be more appropriate.
Laura, have you seen projects that are taking on board these lessons from the healthcare industry on the transportation side?
Yes, it is definitely, I think that one of the things that we're seeing both in transportation facilities, but in a lot of our buildings, we've done a lot of work to talk with people about how to modify their HVAC systems in particular. And a lot of the HVAC systems are designed to have the ability to use a lot more outdoor air, not recirculate air, to filter air at a higher level. So there's those issues. I think there's temperature, and as people have talked about, UV. So I think that there's a variety of things that can be done that can help the situation. They're not going to be cure-alls, but they can improve the environment where, with good materials and with people's careful hygienic behavior, both from the cleaning side and the people who are coming in and out of the planes, and rail and others. So I do think that some of that is being thought about at least and implemented.
And Gabriel, if I could add to that, if we could do something that would enhance the future, I would see there's a way to reduce the chemicals that we use to disinfect. I think what we're seeing now is people are saying, if a little works good, then I'll use a lot because it'll work a lot more in terms of disinfecting, and that's the wrong approach. So from my side, I would like to see how we could reduce the amount of chemicals that we're using to sanitize the surfaces, whether it's through something like the Honeywell UV cabin technology, where we're actually using UV light to disinfect, whether we're, I think Jaguar Land Rover is actually studying that kind of UV light technology to disinfect the air in their air conditioning systems as well. So not only do you have a HEPA filter, but you have UV light, and this is done in healthcare for 70 years. It's been proven technology there. And then the other part of that is, biomimicry. What can we do to these surfaces that we can actually attack these microbes from a standpoint where it is a healthy approach? If you create these spears on the surface, like a shark skin technology, where you create spears on the surface, and when these microbes try to land on that surface, you kill them on contact, and it's not chemical related at all. So I think if we could kind of focus the industry forward and look at more biomimicry approaches, more other technological approaches that reduce our need for these chemicals, so we can avoid superbugs in the future.
Yep. I'm actually going to jump onto that train a little bit, where one of the most interesting things that I think we've been following the news about and hoping that it turns into something much bigger is probiotic cleaners. And we've been chatting with a couple of companies in California, and granted, they are I think they're in the early stages of being applicable at a very large scale. They're being used in offices in certain environments, but they have certain very specific conditions they require, namely being wet for certain periods of time, or certain practices employed to use them. But I think probiotic cleaners really offer kind of the future, where we're tackling microbial challenges, but we're not just kind of breaking down the harm and leaving behind, I think toxic remnants. We're actively contributing to the health of people. And I think that revolution that we've seen in personal healthcare, where probiotics is, that has the ability to start to impact all of our spaces, architecturally, surfaces. So I think probiotic cleaners are a huge trend to kind of look out to in the future, especially if we're going to be cleaning our surfaces more and more frequently. I think the opportunity to use something that will actually give back to people, rather than just keep fighting constantly this challenge of microbes, it just holds a lot of promise. And yeah, there's a company called Z Bioscience. If you guys don't know already about it, it seems really interesting for the next couple of years. Yeah.
If we look at sort of future of aerospace, I had a photo shared with me. Maybe Matthew, you want to comment on this, of the new interiors for the Virgin Galactic project, which I believe you're involved with. Is that the sort of thing we can expect coming down the pipeline, or?
Well, the Virgin Galactic experience was, that was a great interior. That was a true labor of love. That was probably about 7 years of kind of hard work. But we did a lot of really cool things there. We kind of reinvented the way that we laminated stuff, stuck it together, the way that we used foam. The foam, for example, is cross-drilled on the back of it to give it lighter weight. but still has structure, and you've got a really nice soft touch and things. Because, you know, we were faced with like really unique challenges, like all of a sudden we have to look at the headlining to protect the passenger because they might float and bump into it. Well, we've never had that problem before in an aircraft, right? So it was like completely new ideas of things you had to work with. So you know, I think what we find at Tapis, and the same is true at Ultrafabrics, of course, as well, is that we're very much a solution-driven company. So people come to us with problems, and then we find solutions, and we sort of make that work. And that's exactly what we did with Virgin Galactic. We had a lot of complex curves, for example. So we had our fusion stretch material that has a circular knit stretch on it. So it had to be able to bend around those really crazy complex shapes and curves that you'll see on the seat. And then on the sidewall, they wanted something that had a little bit of grip, but was flat and had a little bit of texture in it and depth. So one of our suede flannels was on there to give them that, and then it was soft as well for the bumpiness. All the products on there can be cleaned and disinfected very, very easily. We did have a request that they would have to be easily cleaned in case, you know, some people got motion sick, for example. So there were all kinds of weird constraints that they talked about that we just had never thought of before. You know, we had to think about a different type of crash testing in aircraft. We think about acceleration and deceleration with things like 16G, but with a spacecraft, it tends to just fall down. So much more of a sort of vertical load element. And so, you know, the products that we had compression foams on the back of it. We also have a foam layer built into our existing products that kind of help with all those things. So it was, we had to look at it holistically, and it was really nice that we were brought in very, very early in that project. And we were able to give advice to think about all of these things, as opposed to just being able to think of one of these things, because maybe we weren't involved as early as possible. And I think the same is true with the COVID pandemic issues, that, you know, we've kind of driven a lot of this kind of early conversation. And it's really nice that we're working very closely with airlines and designers and seat framers and what have you, to really shape these ideas of what does the world want? What do the passengers want? We spend, in all of our lives, we spend far too much time coming up with the right answers to the wrong questions. And what we need to do is find out what the right question is that we need to answer, and then build a solution around it. That's what we did with Virgin Galactic, and I think that's what we're in the process of doing with good old COVID as well. So yeah, that's kind of the route path, really.
Yeah, I think it's a nice way to end. You know, as we have to wrap up now, we're out of time. But I think just in closing, I would say that, you know, it's really heartening for me, and I think for many, to know that this, you know, bad situation with the pandemic is driving so much deep thought, and not just about, you know, approaching the issue, the most immediate issue at hand, but thinking about, you know, how this works down the line. How do we use less chemicals? How do we remain sustainable? How do we make it a good experience for passengers, in addition to tackling all these complex questions around dealing with the virus? So it's really great to hear from all of you, and you know, I wish we had more time, but thank you very much for joining and for sharing your thoughts.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.